So after I've printed out my reference image with the photo I took, sometimes I'll make some tweaks with Photoshop or some photo editing software, and I will change the colors up a little bit how I want, maybe add more yellows and the greens. I could even just play around with all that and knock back different layers and play different colors. So even reference image is tweaked to what I want more. And sometimes you'll use multiple reference images and just pick different elements. This photograph has everything that I want already in it, so I'll be basically painting directly from the photograph that I've got. Now, this little guy is one of my favorite tools for using reference images directly to paintings, and it's a page protector, plastic page protector. I put my print in here, so not only could I actually play around with different paint colors directly on here if I wanted to test to see how it went, if I'm painting that closely to it, but something else I can do, which I do far more often, is when I'm using it to transfer the image to the canvas, basically. So you've got all this stuff going on here. It can be very overwhelming on where to start drawing. Of course, you've got big masses of shapes here, but you don't even... Do you even want all that on there? You get to pick and choose. That's part of the thing. That's a whole other video. So I'm going to use the grid method on this, and I know there's other vocabulary. I don't know what all the terms are for the grid method. What's very important with this, however, is making sure the image that you're painting is the exact ratio of your canvas, or else all these little squares you're going to put on here, you'll see what I mean soon, are not going to end up the same way on your canvas. So I've got an 18 by 24 canvas that I'm working on for here, so that's, you know, that's how high it is, that's how wide it is, and I made sure to crop it exactly that ratio. Because what I do with my grids here, you can use a ruler to help you if you want, and sometimes I might even just eyeball a little bit half. I usually make little tick marks in the half, and I will break this up into quarters. Yes, this is a permanent marker, but permanent marker is very soluble by alcohol, so it's not that permanent. Break it up into quarters, and then we're going to make the quarters go into quarters as well. So I absolutely eyeball these little guys. If you're working on a mural or something that's far more precise, absolutely get your ruler out, and you're going to have your quarters and squares and rectangles way more precise that way. But with this, it's not too bad. And I'm just going to break all those little things up. They'll end up in rectangles, halves and halves. I guess they're technically not squares, but you know what I mean. You want all these little pieces. And so the trick is, if you had a different ratio, this doesn't work quite the same way, because these are going to be different shapes and sizes when you draw it on your canvas. So I'm going to do the same thing to the canvas, probably with charcoal or something that's going to show up on there. I'm going to go in half, half, and break those up into 4 as well. So we've got 16 little squares. It sounds like a lot, but it really does help break this up into little steps. And so what will be happening, once I break the canvas up into little squares with the charcoal, you'll have each of these little spaces, each of these little places, kind of like a game pad. And you're only going to be focusing on one corner at a time. So I only have to draw bit by bit to fill that in. I only have to focus on this one piece. And when I focus on this, I'm going to make a note, you know, where that ends up on here. It's going to be fine. You take a step back and you look at the whole thing anyway. But this way, I can save ink. I don't have to actually print out tons of these to mark up. And if I mess up, I can use alcohol or something on more paint to get rid of these lines and even reuse this if I wanted to. I don't tend to reuse these too much. I tend to get them pretty messy as I go. Also notice, with it being a page protector, I can store these in a binder with all my reference images. Keeping that kind of process documentation is pretty handy, and that way I can go back to it and make more. And that's the simple grid method right there, but you'll see me do that onto the canvas too. I'm going to use charcoal. Some people like to use chalk, and I'm absolutely just going to eyeball this thing. Notice I'm not using my wrist, I'm using my entire shoulder, just going all the way down. And that will take some practice too to get comfortable. I can pivot myself instead of just my arm or my elbow. You actually get a bit smoother line with that, but at the same time, it's not horribly precise. And I'm going to just break this up into 16 little rectangle square plots. absolutely eyeballing it. Just like that. And then each one of these squares corresponds, kind of like a bingo card, and whatever is in here I'm going to draw on this. So if I started just this square right here, the top of this kind of doesn't reach the whole tip of that rectangle right there, but I can go down this way. And you notice where the straight line comes up right here for the door, it kind of crosses that line right there. I am kind of looking for how far across that square it's going. So that little door is about a quarter of the way across just this little section right here. And this helps keep all my shapes in proportion and helps me plot this out if I've got the correct reference image that I wanted. So this little corner right here kind of comes all the way out here. This whole building is almost halfway through this entire little square right here, so I'm going to make a mark right there. Let's come down that way, but not all the way, and get a good angle, and we can check these angles, everything afterwards. And then it disappears into some bushes right here, which is fine. Okay, so I realized some of those pictures were a little blurry. Sorry about that. I'm hoping the future Anna with cleaned up audio is going to help a little bit with the explanation of what's going on here. And you can see what's going on. That's why I zoomed in. So each one of those little squares, you see all those little shapes, and they're kind of lining up. And I'll often draw through the shapes, like right there, where it'll be a larger picture crossing those lines. So if on your reference, there's like a tree branch or a fence post crossing in the middle of that square, you can mark that out on the grid, and it will eventually go away. That's why I use charcoal or something chalk that will wash away or dissipate into the paint as I go. So I'm not worried about making all of these extra little grid marks to be the tool of what I'm working with. Kind of like perspective lines, where those lines are all going to go away. All of these strong grid lines are not going to be in the final composition. Same as your perspective lines if you're doing some urban sketching or really searching on perspective. Those will go away. So I'm really not worried about all these lines. They're placeholders, and I'm making sure these lines are something that it's not going to be in the final image. You can paint or draw with paint that is a nice contrast underneath that goes along with your image. I find this just a lot faster than constantly reloading paint, and easier to go over again and wipe away with a damp cloth if I make too many mistakes. So I'm absolutely very fuzzy about this process for such an organic compositional picture right here. There's so many organic shapes. I'm not too worried about where all of these are going, but as you can see, using these squares are great if you want to get lots of detail, want to make sure the ratio of like tree branch to the rest of your grass, or if you're drawing cow, you get a lot more accuracy for the entire ratio, which is something, especially as a beginners that I see struggle with drawing something and getting the ratio right, which is incredibly important in buildings too, like the size of a window to the length of a wall. So this can help with that. You can use it with perspective as well, and you could take one of those little rectangles right there and break it down into more rectangles for more complicated subjects. So I could absolutely draw yet another little tic-tac-toe grid in one of those spots if I was really struggling or really focused on making something super accurate or more detail. And controlling the detail like that is also part of painting. It doesn't all have to be that detailed. I can't remember if I had mentioned this in a different part of the video or not, but sometimes I will time myself, whether I'm drawing the grid drawing or painting, where I'll give myself 20 minutes to slap some paint down in that square and I have to move on. Which 20 minutes can be a very long time or short time, depending on how you're used to painting. But the fact is that I keep on moving on and I'm not stuck in that spot. And the whole point is that I can keep on going back to it after I'm done, but I'm going over the entire canvas first with that 20 minutes. 20 minutes in a spot. So I actually get a picture done. So you're actually kind of for chunking the little squares as you go. Chunking is a term from Raffi and Cleat, I believe, about using 5 minutes to start painting, just 5 minutes to start doing anything. So it's not technically for chunking, it's 20 minutes. That's what I'll use. Use whatever increments you want. That's the whole point. It's breaking something that might be complicated down into smaller steps. And the grid method right here can be good for visually doing that with your composition, but also with your time. And yes, I would paint over some of those lines in that 20 minutes sometimes, because I don't want it to look like 16 squares that have been glued together. I do want continuity between all of the images there, so it's not like I'm avoiding the edge. I'll go across it, and even here you see me going across those lines because it's a guideline. They're all guidelines to be used as tools. It's not supposed to hold you back. So if it doesn't work, okay, cool. But be honest with yourself if your current process is actually working or not. That's why I like this. I can be as detailed as I want about these little squares. I can break it down into more details, or as you see with some of the squiggly images, I can ignore everything that I just told you as well. But it works for me pretty well. Even the 20 minutes at a time chunks, or 15 minutes. And sometimes I'll also put a timer on for me as well, because I do have the problem of focusing too hard on squares and then kind of burning out or getting stuck on problems and not moving on to something else, especially if I need to get it done, or you just get stuck in this little pothole of this isn't working and you're not using action to get yourself out of it. So that timer can help you just move on to the next thing. With acrylic especially, it's so easy to just paint over again. You could even reprime it and get back to that underpainting color if you really wanted to, and it's just a matter of layers. So that's about it for this particular grid transfer video. Please let me know if you want something more detailed that shows you what I'm doing exactly with each square, or if you think you got the hang of this. Thanks for sticking out, and see you around.